AI can do remarkable things, but it can't do the one thing that matters most. So today on the Double Helix, we'll explore what remains uniquely human in the age of AI music. Welcome to the Double Helix podcast. I'm Abby Press, and this is where the two strands of creativity and compliance connect. My guest today has spent the last year and a half deep in the AI music trenches, has seen everything from Suno to Producer.ai to Splice's Instrument. He has over 3 billion streams globally and over a decade in music technology. And this makes me smile, married to a business affairs manager. So he literally cannot escape the compliance conversation. He's also joining our November 12th panel about building permission infrastructure for AI music. Tushar, welcome to the Double Helix.
Wow, thank you for such a great intro, Abby, and so glad to be here and to have this chat with you. And you're right, we can never escape the compliance side of any creative work in my house. So this is the way it is.
I have to start with the LinkedIn post that I found you through. You tried every generative music app worth trying, and your conclusion is you cannot generate taste. Why did you need to say that out loud?
I think part of it is sort of a reassurance for the creative community of which I'm a part of. And I have been in, like you said, in the trenches of the generative music technology for really almost 2.5 years, with the first couple of projects I did for ByteDance on Ripple and for another startup doing generative music for games. And the common theme, I think, generally, if you put good stuff in, you're going to get good outputs, right? And so quite often these models are training on huge amounts of musical data, right? And so it's kind of taking a baseline average. But if you really want to be great, and in any creative field, in any field generally, but certainly in creative fields, you're never going to be a professional unless you're exceptionally good. The competition is just that high. These models work best when you can actually direct them with good taste. And taste is a thing that just comes currently via human artists who can react in real time to cultural factors that aren't quite there can't be inputs for these models, right? Like, who's going to say what is the zeitgeist moment of now? Who's going to say what is the hot thing that people are talking about, or what the models can't react in that speed. We are living in the world of that. So I think that's where the taste component really comes into play, along with just the general essence of creative humans.
Yeah, I've heard that term a lot, especially when all of these tools were first coming out, the taste maker component. And in some ways, it reminds me of how everyone started DJing, but there was still, you can't not have taste as a DJ, right? You're a selector. You have to bring
You're a curator.
Right? Yes, exactly.
But it does bring one thing up, which I think is a change in how people have to treat creative work. A lot of these models, certainly in my experience, they're taking away a lot of the grunt work of some of the stuff you actually do in the production process. The superpower actually becomes the curation in so many ways. People make fun of him, but Rick Rubin is essentially a master curator, right? And so there was an era of producers, even going back to Phil Spector and that time of music, where they weren't necessarily making the beats or whatever, but they were exceptional curators and they knew who to bring in, and that was the superpower. So in some ways, we're going back to that framework of doing the work.
When you were going through this journey, you said 18 months, almost 2 years now, what were you looking for specifically, and what surprised you?
I was looking for, I think, what they'd promised, right? Which is that this would suddenly make full songs out of seemingly nothing, and that was a scary thing. But for me, as someone who's been in music tech for 10 years, I used to build sound libraries for different instruments. I worked on Machine by Native Instruments in the early days and had a pack on Splice in their early iteration, all this kind of stuff. My general MO is that when there's a technology that appears scary, that's exactly the thing you've got to dive into, to actually run towards it rather than run away from it. I think that was the thesis really of what I was interested in, because there was this huge thing of like, oh, this is going to be so disruptive. Artists are going to disappear and real music's going to disappear. All of this sort of scary rhetoric, which is not entirely untrue, but it felt very overblown at the time. So my approach was always just to discover what it was. And I mean, in the early days, it was quite early. When I say early days, that 2.5 years ago was quite laughable what was coming out, right? Like it was completely unusable from a professional standpoint.
Yeah, and how can you really form an opinion on something that's so strong unless you investigate it yourself?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, you can't, I think you have to know what you're working with, right? At every single stage. I don't think it's the same. I think people always make the analog of there was a band and then there was a synthesizer that could emulate the bands and then there was a sampler. I don't think AI is in that exact same lineage really because it's working on an entirely different level. But I think the bit that is similar is exactly what you said. You have to get to understand the tools that are there because there's no reverse button.
You specifically mentioned D'Angelo in your LinkedIn post. For people who don't understand that reference, why is D'Angelo your example of ungeneratable taste?
Well, I think it's pretty simple, right? There's very few artists like him. It's like few and far between, really, as far as the level of impact, the music itself, and just how influential he was. For me, growing up in Australia, especially, he was one of the guys where I thought, oh, I can only be around music like that if I moved to America. It was like one of those reasons I came here to do music. I think that speaks to how impactful he is as a human artist. And when I was trying to make that parallel between the taste thing and D'Angelo, essentially, there's only been one D'Angelo in 25, 30 years. We haven't even got anybody really close to him yet. And maybe the guy before that is Prince, you know? And so these sort of milestone artists are very few and far between. And I think that speaks to how brilliant human taste is and how difficult it is to replicate because we just don't know when it's going to come, in what form it's going to come, and what shape it's going to take. But we know when it's here, the impact that it makes. You know?
Yeah, he's a great example of artistry. And I think that's something that AI, it might be making art, but I don't know that it's fully copied what human artistry is. I mean, we'll see, right? But right now, I don't think it can.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think, you know, all art is derivative and we talk about it all the time. Everyone's essentially recycling things that they're influenced by. And then there's that last 5% that you bring to it of your own story, of your own being. And then there are these sort of really, really special talents that are able to take it even to a whole nother, even to an entirely other level, where the music actually makes an impact beyond music. And it's more of a cultural thing and a social thing. And
Zalia's recent song makes me think of that too.
she's incredible. Yeah.
Like a fever dream that I just don't know how you can replicate that, you know?
Yeah. And she's another great example of that exact thing. You know, I don't know how you prompt music like that. You cannot do it. You know, it's like her background is also so incredibly specific. She's a flamenco dancer. She's from Spain, but she does these, but her musical influences are very, very hard hip hop and urban leaning music. And so that combination, you couldn't prompt that into any model currently, you know. And so that says something, I think.
Well, let's pivot towards the rights and compliance piece that has been missing in AI at large, but specifically in music. I wanted you to talk a little bit about Sound Patrol. For those who don't know, can you explain what it is and why it matters?
Well, I think companies, there's a few of them that are investigating this problem, but essentially the AI music models are being trained on hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of various copyrights. And so once the music goes into the models, there's no way to know which one of those music has influenced the output, right? And we need to figure out a system that rewards the original creators of these copyrights. And I think that we're on a road to getting to that space, right? And so that's one set of problems. The other issue is that occasionally you get outputs that do appear to step on existing copyrights. And so how can you watermark or provide attribution to the audio going in so that copyright is traceable across the entire life cycle of the audio, whether it's from the moment it's released to the moment it's ingested by a model to the moment there's a fragmented piece of the copyright that might exist in the output. It's quite a big and complicated problem, but I think it's an important one from a rights management point of view. It's an important one from the point of view of maintaining the integrity of copyright laws, which I think are the backbone of American society, Australian society, UK, all of these countries that have really strong cultural output and have protected it in a way that creates an industry and creates a way for people to survive off their intellectual property, right? It's such a core thing to the society. So I think it's important to protect the integrity of that. And so that's what companies like Sound Patrol and other companies looking at essentially watermarking and providing attribution to audio in the world of generative AI. That's what they're doing.
That's amazing technology, and I'm really interested to see how that evolves because I do think that rights management has been stuck in the past and it's multi-layered, and that's a huge reason why I wanted to put the virtual panel together with you guys next week. So Sound Patrol could be the permission layer before AI even touches the music. So there wouldn't be retroactive lawsuits, but proactive consent. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think the idea is to provide this technology for labels and rights holders to use to flag stuff, but to also provide attribution across the board to catalog and the rest of it.
Before we go deeper, I have to ask because I'm dying to know. You're married to a business affairs manager. For our listeners, can you explain what that actually means if you were at a party and you had to explain what does your wife do?
I think I know parts of it, right? Because I think there's so many, from what I understand, there's so many tiers within business management. So there's simple licensing agreements, and then there's sort of a broad scale negotiation of agreements. There's also from what I understand, there's also a lot of organizational work that has to happen. So you have to organize contracts and agreements from the supplier side and the internal organization side. Essentially, it's that interesting layer between full on legal and then full on business operational. So it's a really interesting, very niche space where it does seem like everybody knows each other. So if I was at a party explaining it, the chances are that you'll probably know each other through one other connection anyway.
Hey, I thought that was pretty good.
I definitely hear a lot about
Put
it.
you on the spot.
I'm glad. She'll be happy that I got that kind of correct.
Is she involved in any part of when you get contracts? Has she helped you with any negotiations? I'm just curious.
She's definitely looked over a bunch of my production deals and a couple of little sync things as well in the past for sure. But she's also so busy. I'd rather not bother her with that.
Well, that's awesome. So you said something fascinating that AI allows us to break our patterns. Every producer has their habits, their go-to moves. How do you think AI helps you escape your own muscle memory?
Oh, that's a good question. I think that it does. One of the biggest things that it's helped me out with in terms of just time actually is I can take a demo that we write in the room and produce it out to maybe 85% of the way finished. I can put it into a model and I can reimagine that demo in 6 different genres. And what that does is it actually ends up showing you, oh, this is the melody. This section is really good, or maybe you need to work on the chorus, because if the chorus doesn't work with a good song, the good song can work just on a guitar in the song, or it can work as a fully produced record, or it can work in virtually every genre. I've heard piano and dancehall versions of Adele songs, which I'm like, oh, this is amazing. And it's because the song itself is just great, right? And so with that in mind, when you can do this with the AI model, I can hear it in a bunch of different genres within the span of, minutes, essentially. And that would have taken me hours, maybe a whole day, maybe a couple of days to actually explore that option in a traditional sense. So to be able to hear where the weaknesses are, that immediately gets you out of your patterns, because you go, okay, I know I got to rewrite this, or I got to work on this section, or I got to fix this part of the arrangement. So I think it does help with that kind of stuff. For me, I'm a musician first. So I'm a piano player. I play a bunch of instruments. So I tend to start a lot of my music on an actual instrument. With the AI models just being able to sort of type prompt is a different workflow. You know, if I'm trying to start ideas, sometimes that just gets you out of regular chord progressions that you might just go to, or regular riffs that your fingers move into, which is another form of mental trap, you know. So I think it's very useful in that way. In the same way, honestly, that certain sample packs and things like that can be useful as well.
I read somewhere that you see music in colors. Do you have synesthesia?
I don't know. I never fully understood what that is. I do see colors when I hear music a lot. I am sort of influenced in the way I compose by like how the color of the sound feels like.
I've always wondered what that feels like.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing to exactly describe, but from what I understand with synesthesia, there's even people that can sort of that can smell thing, or like there's a different another sort of element to it. So as far as like the relationship between color and music, I do experience that a fair bit, and it helps me. It sort of helps me figure out what are the sounds that go together, because I'm trying to figure out the almost like the color palette of the song if I'm staying in a thing, you know.
When you work with AI tools, has that opened up a new color palette for you, or do you think it just rearranges the ones you already saw?
Wow, that's a really good question. I think I think I experience it as a different, almost it feels like a more digitized version of the colors. So imagine it kind of I remember when I was starting it, to me it felt like, you know, when you see those RGB color charts in the old video games, it looks
Like bit
like yeah, it's almost like 8 or 16 or 32-bit color chart, you know. So it looks blocky.
interesting.
It's not flowing into itself. It's not flowing into the other things that I make. So the idea is like, how can I sometimes I take it in that sense that it feels a bit more pixelated, and like, okay, how can I smooth the edges out of this so that it feels like it's just one really nice painting? You know?
That's so
Is
interesting.
a way I would explain it.
Well, I need to back up a bit because your story is pretty wild and it's one of those like American dream type stories. You're sleeping on your cousin's couch in Culver City. It sounded like you were packing to leave LA and then you got a call about Toronto. Can you tell me about that moment?
Oh yeah, yeah. So I was actually yeah. So there was a 5 years where I was sleeping on my cousin's couch in West Hollywood, and but after that I got married. We'd moved into a small, you know, really fairly run down apartment close to my cousin, so at least I had some family there. My wife was traveling at the time, so she was away, and I was in the house. It was like, this was tough. It was tough times, a tough few months. I wasn't making hardly any money. I did a bunch of odd jobs for those first 4 or 5 years in LA. I was basically about to pack my bags and go back to Australia. I thought, okay, this is it. And a few months before that, I'd applied to be part of a writing camp, which was being run in Toronto by a fairly well known management company. I didn't even have money to fly myself to Toronto, even if I got the spot. So I'm like, I have no idea. I applied for it and then
Go
I
for it.
left
Yeah.
it. I forgot about it. So then fast forward, I'm about to go to sell. I'm like, I'm just thinking in my head, okay, in my head, I'm mentally packing up and I'm like, okay, what do I have to sell before I move? All this kind of stuff. And then I got a call from my friend Millie Petriella. She was running APRA at the time, which is the organization that they're the performing rights organization in Australia, like ASCAP, BMI. And
Okay.
she called me and she said, "Oh, they want you to go to this thing." I was like, "What are you talking about?" "Oh, that camp in Toronto. Yeah, they want you to go." And they flew me out there. Actually, so they paid for me to go out there, my hotel and everything. I was out there for, I think it was a week, maybe it was a 10-day camp. No, it was about a week. And on the second day of that camp, I wrote a song that ended up becoming a single for Chris Brown. It was a big thing on the radio and completely changed my life, you know, basically overnight after 5 and a bit years of being in LA and doing that thing. I signed my publishing deal fairly shortly after that and had a pretty good run for a few years after that.
Is that when you signed with Warner?
That's when I signed with Warner. It was a really interesting time to be in the music business, especially on the songwriting end, because there was a kind of a renaissance happening in pop music, but also in the world of songwriters. A lot of us that got signed in the Warner Chappell family at that time, a lot of us had quite a bit of success in those first 3-4 years coming up to COVID. And yeah, it was great. It was really special. And, honestly, just such a magical time in our community.
Did anything change in your approach going from a bedroom producer to having industry infrastructure?
Did anything change in creatively?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, yeah, it's so weird because, you get signed based on the music that you're making. And quite often before you're even in the industry, it's like so uninhibited and you're just doing stuff. I listen back to my old demos from before I was signed and I think, oh, firstly, a lot of them are terrible, but a lot of the choices are very brave. I don't know if I'd even have the spirit to do that now, because you just don't know. You're not thinking. And then as you get signed, you're right, it does become more of a business thing. It's the best job in the world, but it's also is your livelihood. So you start thinking more strategically and you start, at least in those initial years, you start going, okay, what's in the charts right now? What's the sound that's working? You start to dial in things based on some of these other factors, which were never really present in the moment that got you signed. So there's this weird disconnect there. And I think that always exists, right? There's always like that, in like the building code, how there's like, you have to keep a distance between the fence and the house, and that gap is just always there between creative and business. It's just never going to go away. There's not a natural point where those two things lined up. We've forced them to intersect, but the natural flow of those two things is quite opposite. And so once you're in the business, you have to find ways to bridge those two things constantly. And you have to think strategically about the artists that you work with. And all of those things play into the way you create stuff. And I'm finding now that I'm actually sort of in this part of my career, I'm sort of unlearning some of those approaches that I was taking, which were, I think, more focused on how do I get a hit or whatever even that means. I've had some of that stuff, and at the same time, when I try to go for it, it virtually never works. There's times when you're just in the studio. Like I did a record with Benson Boone. It's the first big record that he had, and I didn't even think anything of it. We did it in a day. We worked on it for a few weeks after that, but I didn't have any particular. There was no strategy around it. It was a thing that felt good. He was a completely brand new artist who nobody knew.
Which
And
must be
so,
kind of freeing.
yeah, it was amazing. It was incredible. I mean, he was already he already had the spirit of a mega star at that time, just to be clear. But yeah, nobody knew him. And I didn't have any particular expectations for any of that. And it became one of the biggest records I've ever worked on. So I don't know if that even answers your, that's a long answer to your
I
very
think so. I
simple
think
question.
so. And I like what you said about the business and creativity piece. I think it's critical to what I'm trying to accomplish with the Double Helix because over the years, I think business affairs has been known as the Department of No back in the day. But over the years, I've learned that being creative in your answers and helping people find a path towards shipping a commercial or getting a song in there, whatever it is really important. So I'm trying to
Yeah.
bridge that gap of I'm at
Oh,
the
of course,
intersection.
yeah.
That's what I'm
You guys are living in that gap,
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
and that's tough. I mean, I hear it every day now, and I don't know. From my experience, it actually seems like business affairs they're the actual ones that want to get it done in the right. So if I always think of the lawyers as the no people, the producers as the extreme yes at any cost people, and then these people are essentially business affairs. You're essentially trying to get the no into the yes, right?
Exactly. You
Yeah,
know exactly how it is.
yeah,
So let's get a little more philosophical. I think you have a full psychology degree, is that right?
yes, yeah.
And a math, and your mom's a professor, your dad's an engineer. Does that background help when you try to understand how humans crave certain sounds? Does it come into any of your work?
Wow, I love these questions. I think implicitly, I would say where that background has probably come into play most is you just get quite a foundation for, like, once you start something, you have to see it to its end, right? and you don't say no until you've seen what it really could be. And so that's a really important thing when you're in the songwriting process, I think, especially where you're in with multiple people, and it's quite easy when people are throwing ideas out, or even when you're throwing ideas out, that people might have an immediate reaction to be like, oh, no, let's not do that. Let's not do that. But I think what I take from it is I always try to see how I would interpret that in a good way, what I think is good. So it's always a, what's it called? It's like the yes and approach, right?
Mhm.
You try to take the thing and see it to its completion to actually see if it's a good or a bad idea, Um, and then, it's hard to say, I think implicitly all of that stuff plays into the way you create good and bad. I think for me, part of coming from that background where my parents were very educated and quite successful in their own careers in that structured, sort of predictable path, that made it a little bit more difficult for me to break out of that for the thing that I wanted to do. And so when I finally got here, it wasn't like I was 18 or 20, when I signed my deal. It was a little bit later for me. And so I suddenly felt like I had to catch up to everyone else. I felt like probably that's the biggest direct thing that I remember that I think about from that background, that I felt like, oh, I had to really, really, now I had to rush into whatever the success was, and what I thought that was back then.
What you were talking about with the yes and kind of reminds me, you mentioned Rick Rubin earlier, and I read his book and it reminds me of one of the segments where he's talking about following ideas. I
Mhm.
imagine like if you're in a room full of people, you could also call them stakeholders. It must be really difficult to follow an idea further. Or you probably have to have like a pretty strong voice and
Yeah.
mindset, like be grounded in what you're doing in order to get your idea far enough along so that people really see what you see, which apparently is colors.
Yeah, colors and sound, when it's all the right
Yeah.
combination of that. I think you're totally right. I think you hinted at something that is just as important, which is knowing when the end of that idea is, and
Also, yeah.
yeah, also knowing that is very powerful. And I think that is the thing that Rick Rubin talks about, is like, when you're, as much as you explore a thing to its conclusion, when there is a no, you have to be quite steadfast about that. And, also in the working environments that we have now, quite often you're in a room for, 6 to 8 hours. It's not a whole lot of time to get a thing ready for the radio by the end of the day or the next day. So you have to learn you do learn to make decisions quickly. And I think part of that is, at a certain level, you're writing with people where there's an implicit trust. It's not like we're in here talking about, okay, what songs have you done? What songs? If you're in the
Right.
room, you deserve to be in the room. So we're all in it, making decisions together, and without any ego. Take the ego out of the room immediately, all the time.
So we're recording this a little bit in advance, but when people hear this, it'll be next week's panel. You'll be joining Dauda Leonard, Mark
Awesome.
Rucker, Dave Bogan. I would call you all architects of the infrastructure that we need for this new future that we're in of AI. And a lot of my audience is creative directors, business affairs teams. We're making decisions about music today. And so I would ask you, after 18 months of testing the tools, do you have a warning label? Is there something that you think everybody could benefit from hearing as we enter the next phase?
As we enter the next phase of generative
AI music
AI music.
and as it bleeds further into the zeitgeist, into culture, into coming across, my desk, maybe somebody wants to license it for a commercial.
Well, I think for as long as we can do, um, and we need the assistance of everybody who believes in the human element of creative work, to protect the rights of creators. And whatever your version of that is, just make that a priority, I think, in and amongst it all, because I think there's going to be massive disruptions to performing rights licenses to commercial sync to score beds to micro licensing to a lot of these segments of music where creators like me came up through that. You know, when I was a I can move to LA to be a composer. And so I worked on a lot of TV library stuff initially because it's the first gigs that you get. It's high volume, high intensity, heavy deadline, and you learn so much in that process. But if there's no world where artists can develop those skills to rise up to the next thing, then what do we have? You know, what do we have? And I think that's an issue that's being faced in all industries. You know, no one's sending the ladder down anymore. And how do we get to that place? We have to start by valuing the human in the creative process. I think that's the key thing to me, no matter how which way these models go. And by the way, I'm all the way into using this technology. You know, I use it at this point. I use it every single day. I have 4 or 5 sort of go-to tools, not just complete song models, but also smaller niche things that exist in the DAW. So I'm not fighting the wave of that at all, but I do think that it's important to keep some semblance of the infrastructure there so that the next generation of artists can build into what they're doing. And you guys are at the coalface of that because you help people get paid.
Yeah. Yeah, I think education is going to be a huge inflection point as, you know, these opportunities in some ways are shrinking and maybe they're growing in other ways, but I think all of us who have this knowledge passing it through is going to be really important. And I think another thing you said about keeping the human involved, that's what I keep seeing over and over again is human in the loop. Not only is it really important for ethical reasons and
Mhm.
for the artistry, but also even just down to the copyright law,
Yeah.
having a human element is going to protect your rights there. So, yeah, I love everything that you said.
Yeah, exactly. I think you got to keep the human in the loop, and you guys are definitely dealing with it from both ends, right? So you're probably seeing disruption in business affairs as even in your own workflows, right? I would imagine that there's some disruption in how people are working within business affairs.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of it's showing up in the work, right? Everyone wants to use AI in every
Hmm.
production now. And so we're trying to figure out like, is there a new language that's needed? Are there disclaimers? And then there's a patchwork of laws that, you know, do we need a disclaimer in that country for that product? It's all kind the law is catching up. But to your point, there's also a workflow that I think is sometimes overlooked with AI. And I, like
Hmm.
you, I'm using it every single day. I think it helps a lot with writing. I think it helps with time management and, you know, even like looking up who owns the music rights to a track. I might look
Right.
that up and, you know, confirm it with another Google search, but then I'm
Hmm.
also still doing all that work of reaching out and negotiating. Like,
Yeah.
there's still that human element that I don't think will go away either because like even with influencers, that's another conversation I've had with other business affairs managers is like you could make an AI tool that does everything, right? Where it finds the viral moment, it finds their contact information, it reaches out.
Or
It's
engineers the viral moment even.
yes, and then it's reaching out to try and license that for X amount of money, but influencers want to feel like they're part of something. They want to
Hmm.
be valued just like anybody else. So if they're getting this cold email like, "Hey, you know, X will send you Y," like there still is that craft of human interaction and relationships that I don't think is going to go away from business.
I agree. And I think specifically in the last couple of months, my opinion has changed on it quite dramatically. You know, I think I was very much in not the doomsday mindset, but I was kind of almost there. And the more I'm working with the latest tools and seeing what they can do, what I'm actually seeing is that the human in the loop is really going to be the point of difference, right? And so when the average becomes higher, people who can use it at an exceptional level are the ones that will win. And I think we're going to see that happen pretty soon. The other side of that, I think, which impacts what you guys do on business affairs and even in the creative direction side, is obviously there's going to be a deluge of content. It's just going to come across at so much of at a much faster rate, and there is going to be people behind that. So how I think that's a different thought about how you guys end up dealing with the level of content. There's a third point which I always think about at like a very macro level, but it's a bit more specific to music, which is I worry that with the sheer amount of music that's hitting the DSPs, that's going to even hit the DSPs even at even greater numbers, right? Essentially, AI music is being placed on the same shelf of the shop as Rihanna or Beyonce, like the records that, or even just really good music that people need to hear or that people should be discovering. And so that's got its own problem, because I think in some ways the DSPs that allow that much of the AI generated content to be on their platforms, it's you're almost fooling people into thinking that that is good, and so discovery becomes more difficult. The discernment of an audience becomes different. I have a hope that good stuff still rises to the top, but I think it's also difficult in this. I find it difficult on a personal level, just with the amount of stuff that's hitting you, to even know what to focus on. So
Totally.
we're not built for that.
Yeah, I just wrote about how Spotify has dead artists releasing new songs, and it's because people are hijacking their platforms and releasing
Oh,
AI.
because they don't have a say in rejecting it anymore off their pages.
I think that they're submitting these AI tracks as the artist. And I don't
Yeah,
know
yeah,
how exactly it transfers through the DSPs, because you would think there would be checkpoints, right? But
yeah.
it's really upsetting. You got to protect the legacy. And I think that you're right. I think it's going to be really weird to discover things, right? And I think Spotify has a problem, and they probably are trying to figure it out, because otherwise it's going to dilute their brand.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I think that to be honest, I think they're looking into it. And I think that generally, in my experience, there's good people who really, really love music at most of these DSPs. And I think hopefully those decisions get made with the right intent.
So your LinkedIn post ends with, all creative professionals should believe this, stand by it, and keep hope from it. And I wasn't expecting to see hope. Why is "you cannot generate taste" hopeful?
It's hopeful because it means that's where you beat the machine, and that's where you can influence what comes out of these models. And I think that I really believe that taste is something that's so multimodal and that is so reactive to real world energy that it's going to be very difficult for any of these models to reach what that is. We barely know what it is, but we know when we hear it or see it or experience it. We know when someone has good taste, or when we see someone wear cool clothes. That is a thing that just cannot be manufactured. And that's why I related it back to the D'Angelo idea, because when it happens at that level, it's even more rare, special, and impactful.
So for our panel, somebody walks in, for our panel, if somebody walks in terrified that AI is going to replace them, after all your testing, what would you tell them?
I would tell them, be scared a little bit, but run towards it and not away from it. There's the thing of, in dream theory, we learned this in psychology, where one of the most common dreams across the board of any culture, all these different languages, is a snake chasing you. Or quite often it's a serpent, or like some sort of creature like that. And in your dream, you're supposed to attack it. You're supposed to cut the head off. And if you do that, normally that'll happen at anybody's point in your life. You might run from it when you're a kid, and then suddenly you're going to run towards it and defeat it. That normally happens at a turning point in your life. I think that's sort of where we are right now with AI and a lot of these models. And we have to run towards it. And as creatives, we've always ran towards technology, so why are we running now?
Wow, that's incredible. I'm trying to remember if I've ever dreamt about a snake.
It could be anything. A lot. It could be a spider. It could be just just a shape of a thing that's chasing you. You know.
I've also heard that screens don't really show up in dreams, which I think is really interesting too. Like
Yeah,
the
I never
digital
thought about
footprint
that.
isn't really in our dreams.
Wow, that's fascinating. So, what does that mean exactly? That we're just so much more present, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, we're existing on a plane that digital technology is not, I guess.
It's not. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's taste.
Tushar Apte, thank you so much for testing everything so we don't have to, and for reminding us what
I'm
remains
here.
sacred. Join us next week, November 12th at 9 a.m. for the permission layer for AI music. Tushar will be there with Dauda Leonard, Mark Rucker, and Dave Bogan. You can find the registration link at abbeypress.com, on LinkedIn, or through the Double Helix Substack newsletter. And you can find Tushar on Instagram at Springloaded. If there's anywhere else that people should go follow you, I know you have a Spotify playlist that I've been listening to.
Oh yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'll check my Spotify writer playlist up there if you want to hear some of the stuff I've worked on. But yeah, Instagram's always a good way to get to me.
Great. Well, this has been the Double Helix. I'm Abby Press, and thank you for listening.